This is, I forgot to say this at the top of the last call. Uh, this is the NeoBooks call for January 13th, 2025. And I had to think about every piece of that. I'm like, wait, what year are we in? Where are we? Okay. I think I'm more or less oriented now. Um, Hopefully Klaus will join us in a second. You're muted, Shiza.
I said you're less oriented, more or
Ye-
less oriented.
Exactly. Exactly. Good. Klaus, Jax, we've got the party back. Um, just checking around. How is everybody? What's up for everyone?
Busy.
Where are we thinking?
Um, I guess I'll start. Right now, I'm working on what's a good synthesis view when you have a lot of opinion pieces on a subject in terms of each view can have versions, but I can say, oh, I refer to this version. Oh, this version has evolved. I want the latest one. Oh, these people have merged their versions. Do I agree with that new version? This kind of uh, thinking of versioning system, a choral versioning system, a bit like a collective preference problem, uh, Arrow's theorem and all that. And Arrow says we cannot have a global preference, but I don't think that's a problem. We can have a multi-headed, like what are the local maxima? It's a partially ordered set in a way. I thought of a good algorithm for incremental maintenance of the maxima of a partially ordered set, but it's not exactly what I need. So I'm trying to define the system better. So that's what I've been doing today. And before that, Jack and I were working on this NABC. You saw a version of that. It's evolved substantially since you last saw it. There's a new link which you probably received. And that's what we've been doing.
Sweet. Thank you.
Yeah, so
Uh,
I've been in conversations with the groups that I sort of travel with, Sierra Club, and uh, people focused in the food and agriculture sector, and we are pretty much saying that's the same shit show we remember from 4 years ago, except this time on steroids, and it can only get worse, right? This guy hasn't even been seated yet. So when you look at this catastrophe in California being politicized and exploited for political purposes. The Hartman report, Hartman came out this morning saying, they're using this to damage the Democratic Party and Newsom. And so, I mean, the fire is still raging and still on the way, and already, you have such a dramatic inputs there. So yeah, it's very disturbing. So my thing is right now, okay, so how do you maintain your mental health in all this process, and and do what you can and ignore what you can't impact.
um, if I can just riff on what you just said, Klaus, there's a post out there called The Great Fire, which is actually a repost from Steve Schmidt, who is a kind of was a conservative operator, but he's comparing the Palisades fire and the other collection of fires now in LA to the Great London Fire, and he's writing that this is going to be an epical disaster that will be remembered for generations. And I'm not sure I agree at all. And weirdly, I mean, if you look at the property damage in dollars, it's really huge. It might be one of the worst natural disasters on the planet. But that's because a bunch of millionaires' homes just went up in smoke. Like the property damage is really high because of the neighborhood that lit on fire. And if you look at, and I'm connecting this back to Trump and MAGA's attacks on this right now, because it feels to me, and I'm just being a cynic here for a moment, but what a perfect moment to attack the state Trump hates the most, the wealthy elites whose homes just lit on fire, a bunch of other things, and then a bunch of stories have been showing up about, and many of which are false, a few of which are true, about policy decisions made long ago in these different places. So one of my conservative friends, his first reaction was, well, yeah, California basically said that companies were being extortionate in their fire insurance rates. So they changed they basically capped them or something like that. And a whole bunch of insurance companies pulled out of the state. They were like, yep, nope, can't afford to be here anymore. Which means less coverage for everybody, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a huge ball here of interesting issues. But if you look at the broad map of LA, of Los Angeles, and you see how much of Los Angeles was harmed, and then you look at the Great London Fire or the Great Fire of Chicago, or the fire in San Francisco after the Great Earthquake, the other fires I just mentioned destroyed the heart of those cities, just absolutely ripped through the heart of those cities and left very little. This one, it's terrible. Like, the numbers are horrible. There's 24 people dead so far and a lot of people displaced, but it is not the Great Fire as far as I can tell. So I think that the Great Fire narrative, as soon as I saw it, I'm like, that seemed to me to stand in direct opposition to the nasty stuff that Trump was pulling. Incoming president of the United States calls the governor of California Gavin Newscum. I mean,
Sure.
seriously? On what planet is that okay? And yet, what Trump has done is created more elbow room for himself to do whatever the heck he pleases than any politician has had in recent memory. Like, I don't know anybody who is anywhere near the power who can just say and do whatever the hell he wants and get away with it.
Yeah,
And
a
I
couple of
think
things.
that's one of the reasons why some people voted for him, by the way, because he's the only one of these modern politicians, despite being an old fart, who understands modern power. Sorry, Klaus, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. I mean, one thing is it takes all the oxygen out of climate change, right? A discussion on how is this even possible and why is this happening? So instant distraction. The other thing is, when you think about insurance rates, it's like Florida. I mean, California has had one fire after the next. It has had atmospheric rivers. It has had one disaster after the next, right? And so it's uninsurable. It's just like Florida. It's uninsurable at this point. And so it has nothing to do with just the wealthy landlord guys and so on. So it doesn't really matter how big or crazy this is. I mean, it's a massive fire, and the entire neighborhoods. I mean, I was just listening on my way back from the coast. There are people there's an entire neighborhood of sort of middle income Californians who lived there forever, like 4 generations. This one family bought the house for $10,000 some 100 whatever years ago, and it's burned down, and 7 people lived in it, and all the jobs that they had are gone because the buildings burned down, the restaurants burned down, the schools burned down. So this is significant. I mean, it's massive. I mean, the rich people, okay, they have enough money to rebuild this, but it has impacted hundreds of thousands of people who have no means, and the insurances I mean, they're either unaffordable or they don't cover them. But the biggest thing in my mind is that no one is thinking about the structural underpinnings of this disaster, which is climate change, which is and climate change is too broad a term. It's the agriculture they're using in the entire region that has dehydrated all the soils. So the soils are dry, and the plants are drying out, and the entire rain cycle and everything has been disrupted. I mean, this is not so. Climate change is too vague, to really understand what has happened there.
And just to go back to the first thing I think you said, which is Trump's brutal attacks, rather than helping, his brutal attacks might be a way of preempting the conversation about climate change.
That's what I'm thinking.
As a tactic, that unfortunately makes total sense to me. Jax, please.
Yeah, so thanks for raising this so early in the piece too. I just want to start off by saying from the other side of the world, we're very sympathetic and empathetic towards what's going on, and it looks absolutely horrible for everyone in the States, and not to say the least about the people who are directly affected. So totally I've been thinking about you all every day, and Jerry, just knowing that you were kind of close by with some of that smoke, that's a very uncomfortable feeling. So I know that. I'm just going to start off with the self-care part of it, because class raised this in terms of self-care. And one thing Jerry knows, and some of you know about me, but I was in emergency management for a decade, so I've got some skin in this game still, and that is that these things take a long time to play out. And the first couple of days, weeks, months are political handballs, very big, potent things. And you've got a larger fire than I've ever seen in my life. But I've seen this on some pretty large scales in Australia. So there's kind of like this peak of high emotion early, where people have this hero thing where, woohoo, our heroes are heroes and our villains are villains. And it becomes very black and white very quickly. And that's when your politicians come in, like what you've got, and working out how they can make the most of this chaos, which looks like what is happening. So self-care, the self-care part of it is that if you can approach this as a very long trajectory, because we'll have that feeling of getting in there and doing something now, or give money if you can give money, but that there's this adrenaline that we all feel. I feel it on the other side of the world, and that adrenaline is you need, if you think about self-care and your mental health, is just to keep the adrenaline levels down, because it's the most helpful thing you can do for a lot of people. I want to talk about this. So there's, for our thinking, and because I think also we should be thinking strategically ourselves about what this means for NeoBooks, what this means for Open Global Mind, what it means for our response. So we go out of a reactive phase and we put it into response. What often happens, the way that we think about these things outside of a political sphere, and I'm thinking about influence, and I'm thinking about the ways that we can maneuver around and be helpful, is that there's a before, during, and after of emergencies, and right in the middle is the during part. So it's at the moment in the during, it's actually being fought at the moment. And once those fires are out and the building starts to happen, it will feel like it's the largest thing. And I agree with Jerry, it's not quite the fire of London, because that actually was the action that precipitated the big building of the fire brigade. So this is kind of a different kind of symptom. It's more likely to be the symptom that's going to precipitate the sort of more deconstructing of the systems that have been supportive around there. In recovery kind of sense starts in day one. And if we're looking at kind of our long trajectories of the various disasters that happen, it's quite likely that there'll be something else that replaces it in a month's time, and something else that replaces it. This is one part of a whole sea of things. And with like a human-centered thinking about recovery, what happens is that the systems that are in place, sorry, just get cut off there. The systems that are in place, which are like this, once
Is that
you
one
get
of the systems that was in place that you had to move?
Oh, sorry, the systems that are in place are like people going, yeah, that was a cat. Yeah, she's a disruptor.
Very much a system in place.
Once you get a school gone, and you get a hospital gone, and then you get a set of traffic lights gone, and then you get a whole neighborhood gone, it kind of starts looking like this kind of big holy mess. And the rebuilding, people rush in to rebuild, but what happens is the social structures have kind of disrupted all the way through there, and they'll never quite be the same. They need to be rebuilt. And one of the ways that they rebuild those, this is counter to some of the ways that people often think about it, but is to start to find humor and find connections between those new structures. So if mum can't take the kids to, or mum and dad can't take the kids to school, then go to work, then go and do something, then come back and go to the chemist and pharmacy and all those sorts of things. If all those things are disrupted, then it starts over the 6 months and over the year to create this great sense of social unrest, which is more than what we'll see in terms of riots and things right now. It's actually deep-seated disruption of community connection. For us and our NeoBooks and other sorts of work, it's really important then to start thinking of our work in terms of how that restores or rebuilds new connections, new meaning, looking for humor and compassion and those sorts of things are actually the things that rebuild. And I'm not saying we need to rebuild Los Angeles. I'm saying that as these things happen, we'll see more and more of those things. This is what we're doing in terms of NeoBooks, I believe, is starting to try and imagine if we have these disruptions that become so disruptive, we've also got this new technology coming through. How are we going to contribute to the future knowledge and to the future generations, those sorts of things through these kinds of disruptions? So the last thing on that is there's an opportunity for us to think very differently about it. And I know that politics is a very hot spot for you. It's really hard to watch it. But if we can think differently about it and go from other angles, we might be really effective. That's it.
Jax, that was wonderful. And I kind of wish you would just go on for the rest of the hour like you were going, because it was all useful and really nice framing. I thank you for that. If anybody would like to comment on, add to it, whatever, please do. But that was super helpful. Marc-Antoine?
I think, yes, we need to think about rebuilding. Absolutely, in some cases. And in some cases, we think about not, right? I'm thinking about the coastal areas where we know that sea will rise. I mean, a lot of Florida will be underwater soon and so on. And we have to think about, in some cases, retreats. Like there's these regions that are perpetually in trouble. I mentioned Bangladesh in the chat. And there's places where disaster strikes where it wasn't necessarily more likely there than elsewhere. I'm thinking of the ridiculous floods in Pakistan 3 years ago, I think it was. Yeah, 2/3 of Bangladesh is constantly flooded, and they know it, and they choose to live there because it's ultra fertile, and that's fine. But it does mean they have to rebuild constantly, and that's the life that is there. That's the life that you have to, yeah, exactly, seasteading. Think of it as, what does it mean to live in this place if it's a place that cannot expect a permanent arrangement? And up to a point, nobody can expect a permanent arrangement anywhere now. But up to a point, there's different risk levels in different places. And we have to think about permanently temporary places. And insurance is not the right framework for that. We have to think about very different patterns of ownership and belonging and investment in a place, and maybe investing in more than one place and so on. And I don't know what's the collective answer to that, but our expectations of normality are a bit overrated, especially now. And I don't want to say this to diminish compassion to those who suffered in this. Quite the contrary, but we cannot just expect to rebuild in business as usual. This is the wrong framing.
Wendy, please.
There's something here that's turning up around how wealth is held. So the idea that you can own land when the land itself is such a joke, because with the land becomes this whole place-centric way of living where the schools turn up because you've got people located, because they can anchor themselves to a patch of something. But if that patch of something is itself not stable, then the societies that come from it and all the learnings and the cultures that come from it can't themselves be stable. So there's something here that is at the very base level, the center of wealth, and, I've got this house and you haven't got that house. That playing field for the moment is very disrupted. You've got people probably who didn't have an amazing piece of land, but they actually still have a house on it. And there are lots of people who had amazing houses on land that they still technically own, that they're never going to be able to rebuild. Or if they did, they'd be rebuilding with the same or similar level of risk. So those are very, and I'm coming back to pacing layers and Stuart Brand's work, or pace layers. there's something there about the deeper structures that really that hold things together and act as attractors for people to come back. And the insurance for the property is one of those combinations of those two things. If you can break up those two, if something isn't insurable. So I spoke in the previous call about loving the idea of living in the bush, but literally you could only live there for 6 months of the year because the rest of it's a tinderbox. And, you know, it's really likely that you're going to have to leave everything that you have there. So you certainly don't have your most precious things there. It can't be done because you have to walk out for 6 months every year or for weeks every year. And therefore, your kids aren't going to be going to the school next door. They're going to be going to school somewhere else. And your business is not going to be able to be there if it permanently needs that location to operate because it will be uninsurable and there won't be any customers. Or you die trying to protect it and they're all left, in which case, why are you doing what you're doing? So there's something there about nomadic lifestyles and large numbers of people. And we're seeing it already with people moving into Australia from other places where they're economic refugees often from places that are less stable, whether it's politically or environmentally, but often one comes from the other. So my point is that we ownership of property and being wedded to a particular place and patch within it is part of the problem. And I keep on wanting, like Jack's, I think, to bring us back a little bit to how we represent those changes and those affordances of a place. Yeah, we build our problems into the society and then we wonder why they keep on turning up again. Jose?
Just briefly before Jose goes, I just learned a new word this week, transhumance, which is nomadic pastoralism. And I didn't know it, but when April and I visited Mongolia, the people out on the steppes of Mongolia practice transhuman. I'm not even sure how to pronounce it. But what it means is when the winter, and in fact, the Mongolians move their yurts, their gurs, 3 times a year. You go up into the mountains at some point because it's less cold there and you have shelter against the cold, but you leave behind your cows and horses, I think, because they can fend for themselves. It's really weird. But there's an entire natural cycle around how this happens, and it's happened for thousands and, well, I think for several thousand years. And there's multiple pastoral cultures around the world that do this. If you go to the Wikipedia page I just put in there, transhumance. If you look at the Wikipedia page, it'll tell you like continent after continent, there's all these different peoples who practice this. Sorry, Jose. Thanks for your patience.
You're muted.
You're
Sorry.
muted.
Yeah. No, I think that's a cool statement. Just following up on Marc-Antoine and Wendy, I think I take it maybe one step deeper, which is to say that part of what I think we've gotten used to, this is the idea of permanence. And this idea of permanence from a standpoint of our, the property and our jobs and our society and everything we build, we think is a permanent thing when it's not. And just as that, I think, again, speaks to the NeoBooks, permanence in understanding, permanence in knowledge, permanence in information. It's not about permanence, but about flexibility, dynamic understanding, contextual understanding. And so I think the work of NeoBooks in part is moving away from this concept of that things are static, that things really exist the way we see them to be. I have a home, it's forever home. It's a property, it's mine. It's going to be insured forever. It will be safe forever. None of those things are true. And yet we behave as if they are.
I exist. Anicca, not and what's the third one? Impermanence, selflessness, and dukkha, suffering.
Dukkha.
And so
Foundation of Buddhism.
For me, this whole conversation leads back to what's important to think about isn't so much about those things we've all pointed to, though they're real and people are suffering and there's craziness in politics and there's efforts to distract us from what's important. But I think if we take it down a layer, then we see those things for what they are and we don't have to worry about them. We don't have to keep hashing them out, because the underlying reality is everything is dynamic. He's not around forever, right? His ideas aren't around forever. He might try to hold on for a couple extra years after the 4 years, whatever, but it's not forever. And so all of that is still bound to this reality that things change. How do we help that change be quality change rather than focusing on all the nightmares that are happening?
And maybe if I can insert a tiny thought, quality change that is changeable, meaning a lot of people think change is, oh, I'm going to go from this permanent
Dynamic,
place
yeah.
to this permanent place, but we might be needing to go into a mode that's much more dynamic than what we have had, in a mode that we are not that comfortable with or don't fully understand.
If I may just keep the conversation for a second. Yesterday I had a movie night, dinner and movie night at our neighbors here, the next door, and we were talking about this idea of work not as a permanent thing, but as in investing where you're advised to hold a portfolio where you're not invested in all of your money in one thing, but a whole bunch of different things. Back to the conversation that we just had about homes and work and position and location in our land, that we have different varieties of work. We're not stuck on this one single career that's going to do it for us, that we're going to, do the whole thing, but that we're able to actually recognize that it's a dynamic world. And sometimes we need to have physical jobs. And sometimes we need to have creative jobs. And sometimes we need to have jobs about organization and so on and so forth. And that we do that as a mix of what we do, not as this static, I'm a lawyer kind of thing, or I'm a whatever, because that doesn't serve us well as human beings, nor does it serve society well. And so I think that it speaks to a lot of aspects of our living.
I love that. Plus, thanks for your patience.
Yeah, I mean the average knowledge worker will have to change job 7 times, will have to change their skill set and update their skill set about 7 times in their lifetime today. I mean, just
that might
think
happen every year now in the near future, maybe.
Yeah, no, well,
I'm
just
sorry.
think about
I don't know. What's a knowledge worker? What defines a knowledge worker? I don't
a
know.
lawyer, an engineer, any of those.
Anybody who indulges in knowledge as the thing they produce.
What about a teacher? Is a teacher?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Or the symbolic capitalists as we defined them lately.
Yes, symbolic.
Yeah.
I was going to bring us back there, yes.
There's a big overlap.
Yeah. So I just came across this thing, Bill Halal, this morning. I don't know if anybody has seen that. But he came out with this book, Beyond Knowledge. And the thesis is that we are in an evolutionary transition, where we are merging into from knowledge age into the age of consciousness. And that because knowledge has become sort of a loose thing with all the misinformation and misunderstanding there, we are actually manipulating consciousness now, our own and that of others. And then he frames Trump as a master manipulator of consciousness, where 70% of Republicans believe that the 2020 election was indeed stolen, and there's nothing can break them out of that reality. So it's actually, for the NeoBook project, it's actually something that we also want to do. We want to enter a phase of conscious awareness, and consciousness could be, I guess, framed as a mindset, as a worldview, right? So it's sort of an interesting discussion that I think makes sense to pursue. I don't know if you have that. Let me get you the website there. If you're interested to pursue that.
I find that both absolutely fascinating, and I wonder what it means in the sense when you're describing Trump as manipulating consciousnesses, you were also very much describing him as manipulating beliefs. And I think more than that, ways to assess belief. I think what's happening right now is a kind of people are very much trying to take over or disrupt the epistemic economy, if you so to speak. Like, what do you consider valid proof for your beliefs? Who do you trust for your belief? It's a trust economy thing. Is that consciousness? I don't know. But the question of collective consciousness is one that absolutely fascinates me. As a Buddhist, I was in Shambhala, which spoke often of awakened society. Like, Buddhist is a path of individual awakening to, among other things, understand our own thought patterns and not be prisoner of preconceived thought patterns. And what does it mean for a society to be awakened, to be aware of its own way of thinking? It's more than just learning collectively, but collecting, and that is very much collecting consciousness, collecting self-awareness at the social level. And Shambhala was a disappointment, but there are other people thinking that way. I totally recommend the book of David Loy on Eco-Dharma if you're interested in that direction of thinking about what could collective consciousness and awakening be. And I will certainly look at the one you recommend. That's definitely something that would interest me a lot.
Mm.
Yeah, he really frames it within the context of the current conversation with the election and the dilemma we have within our own society and culture. So this schism that has opened up there, and where facts are just not pulling, right? I mean, you can't convince many of the folks that voted for Trump with facts. It just doesn't work. So what does work? So the communication challenge has shifted, right? I mean, you have to engage in different ways, and that's what this guy is trying to figure out. How do you a paradigm for raising consciousness? How do you go about this? Yeah.
I will point out that historically there have been pretty long eras where what you just described, Klaus, was true. Like Galileo used the same instrument to show papal armies, the armies across yonder hill, and count the number of people and all that. And then he turned the telescope up to the skies and said, hey, look, moon's on Jupiter. We are not the center of the universe. And what they believed when it was horizontal as a military weapon, they did not believe because of their belief systems, right? So there have been long stretches where religious beliefs or other kinds of beliefs kept us from scientific method, those pesky fact things. But like, if you look back on human history, it's not just a couple centuries here and there where we lived under those regimes. It's very long stretches of time, which is like scaring and shocking and whatever. Scary and shocking if you think about it in that sense.
Yeah. I mean, my favorite comparison here would be you can talk with a farmer about soil and water, but not about climate change.
Mm-hmm.
So he totally believes what you're saying, because there is evidence, relevant evidence to the farmer, looking at his dehydrated soil, and the diminishing yields that they produce. But when you say climate change, it's an abstract concept that simply doesn't resonate.
That's a lot of stuff. Shall we take a moment and pause with everything everybody's put on the table just for a bit? Cool. I'll bring us out. Let's just go quiet for a bit. My brain is jam-packed right now. Both of them. Mr. Liao, please.
It's an update on my end, but a little bit of a departure as well from what we're saying. I think there are other people working on NeoBooks under other names. And well, I'm pretty sure there are. Last week, I got approached from someone from Italy, a colleague of mine, who said, our protocols, I've got a company that's asking me to build something like this for them. And they want me to come in on it as a consultant for them. And they want him to do that. And so we've started to entertain a conversation of a new startup in between the two organizations as an initial possibility. And I wonder if there is, because of that, I wonder if there is an opportunity and or an impetus for us to go out and search for others to see where they're at, what they've got, what they're doing, and to see if there is someone, and possibly even in the traditional book space, in the traditional publishing space, thinking about this, as well as what are the universities doing? What are the different research parks doing in this space? I think it makes sense to try to figure out if we can glove onto something that's already happening, or potential for happening, that would make it more possible by our participation. Totally different thought, but just wanted to throw that.
No, extremely important. The answer is clearly yes. But what is this? One thing we're supposed to do today, and we didn't get into it, is what are requirements for NeoBooks? And I admit I didn't do my homework and list them. Because for any subset of requirements, I'm sure I can think of a group. For the whole of them, I'm not sure. But there are many subsets, and we need to know what we're talking about. There's many aspects to the NeoBooks project from different people here. But yes, what I can tell you is a lot of the book industry is interested in more live books, especially in the pedagogical world. But on the other hand, they want something they can package and sell. So the kind of global reusable knowledge stratum is something you get more on the open access, open knowledge. The open knowledge people are definitely somebody to approach. And there's a good group there. Yeah, we could do requirements for 10 minutes, sure. The in the research, you mentioned research. In biology, for example, there's huge databases of known facts, and there's a whole work on micropublications that I think is somewhat relevant. These people would be interested in talking, maybe, or they're certainly cognates. I keep saying, my goodness, us collective intelligent people are not that good at working together. We need more networking. There are a lot of CI projects that are looking for what does CI look like concretely, and pooling resources on that is absolutely something we need to do. The CDL is looking at it at the argumentation level. Sorry, Jose, I'm interrupting you. So I can tell you more about what CDL's been doing. There are a lot of efforts.
We modeled our protocols on GitHub very simply, right? Because something that exists, something that we understand, something we can model against.
Yeah.
And the beauty of GitHub is it's an open source environment with open information as far as access to libraries and so forth, and the opportunity for corporations to pay to get all their stuff and make it private, and a bunch of services around that. This organization wants to do the private stuff, both for itself. It's a 20,000 person family of companies, both for themselves and to sell to others. So if there's someone who's got the opportunity to benefit themselves, they're in that industry and they want to see how they can benefit from the closed part, recognizing that the open part needs to exist in order for the open part or the closed part to be viable. That to me is part of this game. It's who's out there that has a desire, a benefit from this work for their purposes.
Absolutely.
I'll stop there. Maybe we can have 10 minutes of
and related to that,
talking.
Where the boundary is between the profit and the open, because quite often it starts in a generous place and then gets lost. The boundary shifts over time as the opportunity to make money turns up. And so you get the sort of freemium model with the creep. You lose what you wanted and you signed up for. And I certainly, there's some values behind this that I think have to be true and remain true.
Marc-Antoine?
Sorry, Marc-Antoine, just to, you know, Microsoft buys GitHub and does the opposite of what everybody expected them to do. They actually give free, open, and closed repos to everybody. If you're a small person, a small development team, you actually get more openness. So Microsoft recognized what they were buying and did the right call there, which is interesting because everybody thought they'd go the opposite direction. So I think there's some lessons being learned in that space, but I totally agree with you, Wendy, that is where the risk is.
Jose, I don't know if you're aware of Jack's K-Hub model, because it feels appropriate to discuss it here. Jack, do you want to present it or should I? You're muted.
I want to hear your interpretation.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. So Jack's idea is basically, let's have what he calls knowledge hubs, which would work a bit like a library system. So people would, people register to their local library. So they would register to their epistemic community's knowledge hub. And the knowledge hubs would have a federation of knowledge. So they would exchange ideas between them. And you could sometimes go to the Federation to see, Jack called it a kind of golden vetted fact. And I'm personally pushing against that and saying, well, at least kind of the multi-valued, the core role description, but with a clear understanding of which individuals and knowledge communities back certain things and why. So, but whichever it may be, there's the Global Knowledge Access, the Global Knowledge Federation, and the Knowledge Hub, which can internally have some private knowledge, some made public to the Federation. And it would be a community unit of epistemic sharing. So you can get to know the people, how they think, and so on. And the public-private boundary can happen within each K-Hub. But what is made public to the Federation then becomes shared by all K-Hubs. But you pay into the K-Hub to have access to the Federation. And because it gives you a community. So I'm not sure. I mean, this is what I understood. Maybe you want to add things, Jack, at this point?
That's fair. I used the term digital public library for the Knowledge Federation of the K-Hubs, and it's a library of what we call trustworthy information, simply because the only people that have access to create and insert knowledge into it, information resources into it, are the K-Hubs. And the K-Hubs, if they are a member of a federation, play by a set of rules which try to prevent the likes of Google and Meta interfering with what, in other words, the truthiness of the stuff cannot be altered from external sources. That's the thesis. Our first approach is to use a game-based platform, a role-playing game, very much modeled after World of Warcraft. But when you go on a quest, you're not arming pistols and shields and swords, but rather your guilds are contributing game moves in the form of conversation pieces to a structured conversation that responds to the quest. And a typical quest might be something like, what are the known causes of climate change? Or how do, what are the issues surrounding women's rights, and so on and so forth. Quests are not of the trivial kind, like where do you get the best Pepsi? That's off the table. This is truly a sense-making community. But Marc-Antoine had it right.
I'll be curious to hear Jack's on the clearinghouses, but very quickly, I think that we can have a very public license for the underlying software of Federation, and or maybe a base K-Hub, but then have, some K-Hubs will have their own demarcation of public and private knowledge and make it work that way. Clearinghouses, I'm curious. Unmute.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find the actual name for it. It's a social services clearinghouse, and they call it a clearinghouse. And if I can find the link, I'll pop it in the chat. It's a little part of what you're talking about, Jack, but nowhere near as developed by any means. But it's a trusted knowledge hub that can only be contributed to by sort of social services sector organisations. So domestic violence and women's shelters can send their information over, or some government sources can send theirs, but it's mostly in that kind of middle area. So I couldn't post something up there unless I was working for one of those organisations or part of that organisation. So it's got that sense when you do go to it that it actually is trustworthy information, and yeah, it's thanks, Wendy, you've found it beautiful, and I've used it quite a lot over the time.
So I want to build on this piece for a moment. Let's face it, a K-Hub is a social network, a local self-contained social network of its members. And we know historically that bad actors join social networks. So I chose the role-playing game model as our first entry into the space because I didn't want to have to create an ecosystem where we had to hire tens of thousands of censors. I really wanted people to be free to talk, but not harmful. In other words, you're in a guild, and inside that guild, your conversations are in fact private. The only thing that's public from your guild is the game move the guild puts out into the public conversation. So you can have bad actors in a guild, and if the rules, if the way World of Warcraft's history shows anything, bad actors don't stay around. They don't get to be heard. They don't get their dopamine rush by being hateful or slanderous. So it's kind of a self-censoring platform where the guild leaders are responsible for the quality of not the truthfulness, but the quality of the game move that their guilds make. And there's penalties for letting slip a game move that is disrespectful. We're trying to recreate social networks.
Anyway, I don't know if you see if Jose this felt relevant to the idea of how to connect NeoBooks islands or GitHub repositories in Federation. I was trying to bring the idea that, I think it's very important when we're building knowledge infrastructure to have very easy ways to have little private repos when we can have conversation and then selectively say, okay, I think this is ready. Let's move it to public. Like be able to selectively push things from private to public because people want to have a feeling of safety that they're among trusted friends who won't jump on them to elaborate, to evolve an idea to a certain point until it's ready to confront the world, so to speak. And
right, it's in draft mode.
Yeah, and that way the private repo, public repo, it needs to be more granular than that, I think. Of course, there's ways to go around that, but that's one requirement I have since we were talking requirements.
I think that's a knob to set by personal preference because more and more I'm finding pieces written about, hey, just work in public. And that means that you'll have a drafty page out there. It's in public view and you can mark a draft at the top, but it's drafty, drafty, drafty. Do you have to go? Thank you. And so I think each person might make choices about where they want to set that setting. And one of the things that startled me, I did a podcast interview with Tiago Forte, the Build a Second Brain guy. And I learned on the podcast, because I hadn't really read his materials that much, that his second brain is his private external brain, and that his third brain is only the stuff that he then decides to publish and share with other people. And I'm just trying to figure out, how do I get everybody to overshare? And then we'll make our way through it somehow. But how do we get everybody to overshare? Jack?
So I wanted to slightly build on the Knowledge Federation. We all kind of know that once you've got a large cardinality of GitHub guilds or K-Hub guilds actively involved in massive epic quests, so to speak, you're going to accumulate so much information that it becomes unnavigable. You can't just put it in a book. So my proposal has always been that we would do something the equivalent of a topic map. Now, a topic map is just another name for what Google calls a knowledge graph, except our topic maps go a large distance further than a knowledge graph. But the point is that we'd like to build a roadmap by subject. So each topic in a topic map, like a node or vertex in a knowledge graph, is its own subject. And the theory is that there's only one and only one node for a given subject. You won't be dispersed around the world. This is the place you go to find out all that is knowable about this subject. But then you want roadmaps away from it to what it's connected to and what's related. That's the point of the topic map. And so that's the whole point of the Knowledge Federation is to make a truly navigable digital public library.
Jack's writes in the chat, sounds like the brain. Jack has a taxonomy of sort of layers of what makes something a concept map, a knowledge graph, or a knowledge map, or a topic map. And I can't ever really repeat it myself,
Well,
but
it goes like this. A mind map is system one. You write something down, draw a line, write something down, draw another line, write something down. And that's pretty much what the brain is, except that Jerry uses it very cleverly by placement so that you kind of get some relational ideas from his way of placing. Go ahead, Jerry.
the brain also includes link and thought types, which would let you say author of, book written by, except I don't use that metadata, but it does include the feature to do so.
Okay. So the next step up is you put a name to the arc. A causes B. Okay. But the next step up is the fact that the causal relation between A and B has a biography. And it also could be contestable. And how in that graph would you know that that relationship was contested? Well, the RDF people will tell you, these are the people that do these kinds of graphs, they'll say, well, we just reify it as its own subject. And that means I have to go elsewhere in the graph to find out what they're talking about. So my topic maps say this relation is a subject. And we will give you, the promise is that there will be links to where it came from. Now in my biology platform, if it says that A causes B, its biography will tell you all of the sentences in all of the documents that it read where it got it, and you can go read them. So this is everything needs to be traceable and transparent. That's the taxonomy. Mind maps are system one. Concept maps are straddling system one and system two, and topic maps say you're going to do some deep thinking before you make this line on this graph. So they're system two.
Thanks for explaining that. Really appreciate it, Jack. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We're over our time at this point. And probably many of us have like real world things to have to get back to. And I've got to catch up on a million things, but this has been great. It feels like we dug a new trench someplace today, in interesting territory. I'm interested in getting back to the question about what requirements we have, and also elaborating on that question given what we've just talked about and so forth. So if anybody wants to take a swing at that, either on the mailing list or in Mattermost or right now, Jose.
No, I was just going to ask whoever has the best perspective on what we talked about last week, as far as what we are trying to capture from these requirements. I think that would be helpful to share with the whole, so that we can noodle on it in the same way if possible.
I think what we're trying to do is, what do we expect the system to enable us to do? Like really have user stories on, as a user, I come here and I can do this and I can do this and I'm looking for that. And this is
And
how
with
I,
two user perspective, the creators and the consumers.
as many users as necessary.
So a variety of use cases, I think, is useful. And I was not here last week. I was just setting up for the whole Huntington thing. So, and I don't think we have a recording of last week, correct?
Oh,
Jax, you do?
Yeah, I popped it up on this on Mattermost. So there's
Oh, cool.
the
I will go hunt
recording
for
plus
that.
the notes. And also
Brilliant. That's
too,
right.
yeah, next week is I was going to offer up sort of a summary of where we've been over the last 4 weeks together too. So if that's helpful.
Oh, that'd be
Excuse me.
super helpful.
But yeah.
Would love that. Good. So maybe we start there next week. That'd be great.
Thank you, Jax. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you all. This is like super cool. It's like this is my graduate courses in something.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.